Welcome to the final lecture, Ethics in the Computer Age. We are going to begin today by bringing together a kind of synopsis of everything that we have covered this semester, specifically focusing at the end on some of the current events that have shaped the conversation that we've looked at this semester. So let's get started. We started at the beginning of the course by arguing that to understand how to make moral and ethical decisions, we have to ultimately come to an understanding of what it means to be human, what we called the human question. To do that, we looked primarily at two men, Erich Fromm and Charles Darwin. We loosely combined them using Carl Jung's concept of the quaternio and the concept of archetypes. We said that part of what is distinctly human following Darwin is that we emerge at a point in evolution where instinct is minimal. And therefore, there is a human need to figure out who we are. We said that ultimately the answer to that question will be formed within a social context, whether, as we'll see momentarily, it's the family, as in Charles Darwin's case, or some other social construct. Ultimately, we said that to make a moral decision, in a social context presupposes what we called a foundational mythology. In following Erich Fromm, we said that broadly speaking, there are three types of foundational mythologies: life affirmative, life neutral, and life negative. Implicitly, these contain an answer to the human question. So if we look at these within the context of Charles Darwin, Darwin argued that social evolution which implicitly begins at the end of biological evolution, follows a pattern set in biological evolution insofar as it is a pattern of increasing complexity. So the social Darwinists would argue family, tribe, village, city, city-state, and ultimately the nation, that the nation represents the end of all of human evolution, both social and biological. We said that one of the things that Darwin postulated was that because we lose our sense of instinct, because our instincts decline, consciousness emerges as organisms become increasingly complex. And for Darwin, this applies at both the social and the biological level. And this will become the foundation for the argument that societies prior to the nation state, probably prior to the city, are by definition primitive. And you'll recall when we talked about the concept of race, the implicit argument is that if you're not Northern European white, you're not fully human, including Southern European whites. Now, some of the points that Darwin missed along the way, Darwin was correct when he argued that technology, or the creation of tools, is the mechanism by which we, in conjunction with society, create a sense of who we are. What he didn't see was that there is a sense in which we lose our uniqueness. We not only demythologize the world, we demythologize ourselves. Darwin also failed to see that the more complex society becomes, the more depersonalized we become. And in one of the more important lectures and topics this semester that we looked at, we said that what characterizes the modern world is a sense of loss of intimacy, a loss of community, and a loss of safety. So if we look at modern technological developments, and we can also add the argument that we made in that lecture, is that in the modern world, we become, for all intents and purposes, a community of one. And instead of a collective sense of what it means to be human, I must determine who I am. Morality becomes a matter of personal choice. And any concept of a common world, a common experience, a common identity is subsequently broken. So we shouldn't be surprised that we face many of the social problems that we now face. It's broken. So let me stop there. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I understand. So is it that we sort of lack a collective culture, a collective framework of understanding the world?
Correct. We don't.
Mhm.
So one of the points that we made was, if you go back to 1624, if you remember our conversation about Edward Herbert, he rejected an a priori definition of what it means to be human. There was an inherent assumption that through observation, we would come to a conclusion. In point of fact, he was wrong. So if we think about the diagram above, then at the same time that we're demythologizing the world, at the same time that we're losing a sense of our uniqueness, we get the cult of the individual. So one of the points that we made early in the semester was that starting in the first century of the Common Era, that shift begins to become more important, more dramatic. That by the time that we get to Martin Luther, it becomes deeper. Symbolically, when he's confronted by Charles after the Diet of Worms, his response to Charles was, "Here I stand." For all intents and purposes, in Protestant theology, it's about the individual's relationship to God in a very radical and profound way. So that which is inherent in Paul becomes explicit in Luther. When Herbert moves away from any a priori definition of what it means to be human, he leaves us in a position where, if we can't demonstrate conclusively through observation some universal definition, then in the end, I'm left to myself. And that's what we've been doing. So if you'll recall, because of Edward Herbert, we get utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is ultimately going to lead us to John Stuart Mill. And if you'll recall, the principle of harm. So it's not about right or wrong anymore. It's about harm. So if you can't prove that I'm harming you through my actions, there's nothing you can say to me. And likewise, if you're doing something I don't like, there's nothing you can say to me. And nothing you can do unless you can somehow prove that by continuing to do what I'm doing, I'm going to hurt you. So while he assumed there would be a principle of redress, and if you recall the principle of redress, it basically says, if I hurt you or you hurt me, the society has to fix it. It died. It really didn't carry forward. So what we're left with, courtesy of the 1960s, situational ethics, consequence and intention don't matter, only the moment does, followed by hedonism, if it feels good, do it, followed by a kind of nihilism, just do it. Here we are. And at every step along the way, technological development has made it worse. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, that's a lot to digest. Go ahead. Question?
Yes, I did have a question. So, we talked about how in like From, right, that there's life negative cultures, and that those are usually like very sexist and authoritarian and racist and things like that. How does that factor into this process? Like, I mean, obviously they're all connected, but how do they merge and merge together?
Well, let's clear the screen and start again.
Mhm.
If we begin by taking a look at what characterizes a life negative culture,
Mhm.
as you said, they are all inherently aggressive. They are inherently sexist, male dominated and male oriented. Racist, classist, insofar as some people are inherently more valuable if you look at our contemporary technology-driven society, it's all there. And it bleeds over and has even created a technology overclass. We pay people in technology disproportionately more than we pay people in other work areas. They are similar to the robber industrial barons of the 19th century. And to make matters even worse, when you think about our conversation of what happened from 1950 to 1970, we know that there is a massive economic shift away from manufacturing toward a service-based economy. The service-based economy ultimately ends up with two classes: those who have power and money and those who don't have power and money, the rest of us. And technology is playing an ever increasing role in that economy. So if you think about what happened primarily in the 1960s, that set the tone for everything that's happened since. We said that the first wave of automation targeted people like material handlers who did nothing but move boxes in factories, and they are replaced with conveyor belts. Interestingly, at the same time, it begins targeting more highly skilled positions. At one point, there were about 500,000 telephone operators in the United States and close to 20,000 elevator operators. Good luck finding either one now. It's also during this period, the late 60s and early 70s, the phenomenon called displacement. So because of the impact of the first wave of automation, the shift to a service-based economy, you have initially high school grads displacing non-high school grads when it comes to low-end jobs. So in the 60s, fast food restaurants were staffed by teenagers and people who never finished high school. By the 70s, they're staffed by people who went to high school. By the 1980s, you begin to get college grads displacing high school grads. And it continues to get worse. As you were saying before the lecture began, the goal of most educational systems appears to be to eliminate the teacher. So is that where we're going? And that was brought home this morning. I was having a very interesting conversation on the subject. And one of the questions raised by the pandemic was, so we've become even more highly leveraged by technology and even more dependent upon technology. So in this conversation, the owner of a business said to me, look, let's assume that based upon what it takes to live in California, in San Francisco, I have to pay someone $80,000. I now give them the opportunity to work at home, and you go and you move to Denver, where the cost of living is 2/3. So now the question becomes, do I lower your salary because you live in Denver? Well, that's not a ridiculous question when you consider the fact that if I live in Denver and you bring me to San Francisco, you're going to have to pay me $20,000 more. So my friend said, okay, let's take it a step further. It is a known fact that why do I even need you? And based upon what I've seen in the last 15 years, this is what's happening. Call centers are being outsourced. Programming is being outsourced. Programming has moved to a 24-hour cycle. So when my workday is ending, I leave an assignment for my Pakistani programmers. And when I come in the next morning, the solution to the problem is done. And this is increasingly being viewed as a competitive edge. What it really means is that I can make more profit. Remember, we've also said it is no longer true that each generation of new tech will create at least as many jobs as it eliminates. So if we go back to the question you asked, Michael, this is what's happening.
I understand. Yeah.
If you go back to our conversation about social Darwinism, William Graham Sumner was an advocate of the extermination of anyone who was not perceived to have value. You may recall, he said, don't educate them, shut off city water, city sewage, don't give them health care, feed them enough so that they can work in the factories and die. So if you look at it from another perspective, Henry Ford's revolution was a progressive devaluation of humans by which being human was no different than any other interchangeable machine part. It was an attack on a craft-based economy. And by craft, I don't mean someone doing arts and crafts. I mean the crafts person who is unique in his or her ability to create a specific product. And yes, the shortcoming of that is twofold. It costs money and it's not scalable. If I'm a cabinet maker, there are only so many cabinets I'm going to make in a year. So the brilliance of Ford's revolution, which takes us back to Brave New World and Brave New World Revisited, was the idea that being human was no different than a machine part. So all humans become dispensable and disposable. You don't do what I tell you, I fire you and I put another replaceable part in your place. And it keeps on going. So, Johannes, what do you think? What's your reaction to all of this?
It is just truly sad.
What?
I mean,
You're on the phone.
what else is there to say? Like, would be nice if we could go back, but I don't see a way.
Well, unfortunately, I think you're largely correct. But go back to another point that we've also made multiple times this semester. And one of our biggest problems right now is that we refuse to deal with that. We have essentially reduced our future to a series of 90 days and ultimately it can be distilled down to one question. Will my profit increase? So underneath this are a series of prejudices. And it becomes a feedback loop. And if you take it a step further, I'm not sure. I'm going to guess that by the late 1960s, a new acronym hit the industrial world. Let me just get the acronym. It was called Just-in-Time Inventory. And the idea behind just-in-time inventory was only buy it when you need it at the last moment. So if nothing is in stock, you don't pay taxes on it. And you keep your cost of doing business down low. So for example, back in the day when I knew Michael Dell, I went to one of their plants at Round Rock, Texas. And on one side of the assembly facility were trailer trucks. All the parts necessary to build computers. On the other side, all the completed computers. The inventory was owned by the manufacturers. Dell only took possession of it when it came through the door and the brief amount of time it was put into a new computer, and then you were immediately billed. It took about 15 minutes to make a computer. 15 minutes. So Dell was saving millions and millions of dollars because it had virtually no inventory. Am I making sense? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Johannes, you agree? Makes sense?
Yes.
Do you know what a company called, about a company called Crate and Barrel?
Rings a bell, but I couldn't tell you anything about it.
Okay.
I've never heard it.
Home goods, pots and pans, cooking stuff. They compete with companies like Williams Sonoma. So it's pretty high end, pretty expensive.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I've well, yeah, I think I've seen it in the store. That's probably why.
So they used what we now know. They were the first. You want to work? Tell you what, I need you here to open the store. So be here at 7:30. At 9 o'clock, things are pretty quiet. You go home. Things pick up about 11, come back. Around 12:30, things get quiet, go home, come back around 4. And you'll be done by 5:30. So in Crate and Barrel, no one works an 8-hour day. Or if they do, it's not 8 hours in a row. Once again, humans have been reduced to a commodity. I don't care about your personal problems. I don't care about your babysitter. I don't care that it's going to cost you more money to get here. You're going to be here when I need you here, or you're not going to work here. So increasingly, we've become commodities. And if you think about some of the other things that we've been seeing in our economy, which we've talked about, I will do everything I can to keep you from being a full-time employee in my company. Because then I don't have to pay benefits and I'm going to make more money. And the more sophisticated technology becomes, the more of a commodity human beings are. Yes, what are you both thinking?
What I'm thinking is just for me, what's strange in this is like how we have, it seems like with a split shift and things like that, it's like we have the opportunity at least to work less, right, than we had to in the past, but yet we don't actually enjoy the benefits of like working less, and it's actually become an extreme negative, like zero employment, stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. It's just strange to me. It's like the idea that hey, you don't have to work as much would seem like in another time like kind of like a dream or something to be achieved. And then now it's like, oh, well, you don't get to work as much, you don't make as much, and your life just sucks, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that's not a fully formed thought yet.
Well, before the computer revolution, France began to experiment with how do we give enough jobs to enough people. And the answer in part was, well, we're going to go to a 3-day work week. That way, over the normal work week of 6 days, 2 people will work. Well, that's gone. So what we're seeing is that overall, the number of jobs are dropping. So remember also, we said that when the government counts unemployment, it only counts people receiving benefits. Not people who have given up. Not people who are part-time and want full-time. Not a group of people called underemployed. I'm underemployed. I have 5 college degrees and I'm a part-time professor. And I'm paid basically minimum wage. So in 2018, when you added all of these people together, unemployment was nearly 25%. So we're back to one of the questions Huxley was concerned with. What does the future look like? And one of the points he missed and that's where we are. Wait a minute. You want to do what? You want to tax me? You want to give my money to some lazy person who doesn't have a job? You what? Once again, what Darwin failed to realize was that when human being is demythologized, there's nothing left but me. So here we are. And once again, to go back to Brave New World Revisited and some of the other things that we've talked about this semester, if there is no intimacy, no community, and no safety, why would we be surprised that addiction is such a problem? And when we think about what we're seeing, so communication breaks down, community breaks down, I'm alone in the universe, and I don't have to do anything I don't want to do. I don't have to listen to you. I don't have to recognize you as human. As I said earlier in this lecture, unless you can conclusively prove that what I'm doing will hurt you, stay out of my life. You can't tell me what I'm doing is wrong. Stay out of my life. But the reality of the matter is that this cannot continue. This will come to no good end. And it would be interesting if Huxley were still alive and did a revised version of Brave New World Revisited to see exactly what he would say. But it's not good. You know, the reality of the matter is that if we continue down the road we're going, it's quite possible that no Americans will have a job in 20 years. Remember MIT 2038, 80% of the economy or 80% of the population won't earn enough money to survive. Another 10 years later, who will? What are we thinking? What kind of a future do we want? I don't think we're thinking. I think we're in the midst of rapid social disintegration. I think communication is breaking down faster than it ever has in human history. I think the health crisis, addiction, the rate of suicide in people under the age of 30, all of these things are pointing to the systemic breakdown of our culture. And most of it is being fueled by technology and by people who continue to argue that technical problems are not social, that business problems have no social implications. And it's not true. As I told you before, we now have 5 generations of children who were raised essentially without parents. Why are we surprised when we don't know what gender we are? We don't know who we are. We don't know what we are. We don't know what we want. We have virtually no sense of community, no direction, no sense of the future, no commitment to the society as a whole. Why are we surprised? We shouldn't be. And if you think about one of the essays that we read, one of the points that Huxley made, which he more or less picks up from Erich Fromm, is that what's happened is that we've construed the concept of freedom to mean no limitations. You know, if you live on a desert island, have at it. But we don't. And our tendency is to say that any limitation whatsoever, by definition, is oppression. Well, no. I think that one of the strongest points made by McIntyre is that freedom, to be truly free, it must have limits. But now we come full circle. If I have no sense of community, no sense of common identity, no sense of common good, then any limitation on my autonomy is going to be oppression. And that's where we are. And very soon we'll have 6 generations of children who were raised in a morally neutral environment without parents, who have no sense of who they are, what they are, why they are, or what the point of this is. Then what? What's left? You know, you're right, Mike. Technology could create a world in which no one ever had to work. But if that's the world we want, if that's the future we want, not going to work given the current structure of our society. And unfortunately, the racism, sexism, and classism that's inherent in our own society is playing out globally. 6% of the South African population is vaccinated. It's outrageous. But they're Black and they're poor. So we don't care. It's played out over and over again. So the more that I think about this and the more that I work with technology and the more technology becomes central to my life, other than some of my old books, honestly, I don't think I've picked up a paper book in 4 or 5 years. The only time I write anything at all is when I'm delivering a lecture. Everything in my life and in my world is digital. And in one sense, it's wonderful. But it comes down to this. And ultimately, if we keep going the way we're going and we create a life form that is not carbon-based, what are we going to do when it looks back at us and says, no, no? Despite what Joseph Fletcher said, all actions have consequences. And every day of our lives, we are fashioning the future through the consequences of our actions. Any last questions before I sum up and let you go?
No, I'm good.
Okay, Johannes, are you good?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay. When we think about Brave New World Revisited, in the span of a short 25 years, Huxley was quite surprised to see the extent to which we had given up our humanity and our autonomy to technology. In 25 more years, what will it mean to be human? What truly is the future of our species? I think that fundamentally, we come back to one of the points I made in an earlier lecture. If we don't get them, we break. And increasingly, it's becoming difficult for us to get basic human needs taken care of. If we are not at a tipping point, we're not far from it. I think the extent to which our society has become frayed and dysfunctional in the last decade is breathtaking. The question is, do we have the courage to ask the right questions, make the right decisions, and come as a community together and find an answer to the most important question of all? What does it mean to be human? I want to thank you. It's been a pleasure. I hope these lectures have proven interesting and fruitful. And as long as you need me to be, I will always be your teacher. So thank you and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.